but I think I'm better to a point that I feel better than I did, I jokingly said 20 years ago. I feel perfect.
President Trump says he feels cured of COVID-19, saying that he wants to make his treatment available to everyone. Our 9 health expert, Dr. Payal Kohli, is with us now. So let's talk about the new antibody therapy that the president did receive.
So, Tom, it's really a cocktail of 2 different antibodies. One is actually derived from somebody who contracted COVID-19 and recovered. They cloned their antibodies. And the second antibody is synthetically manufactured in the lab from genetically engineered mice that are genetically engineered to make these human antibodies. And what the antibodies do is they actually bind to the spike protein of the virus, which is the protein that the virus uses to get into the human cells, take over the human cells, and turn them into viral replication factories. So by binding the spike protein, they neutralize the virus, prevent it from getting into the cells, and really prevent it from taking over. So the best way to think about these is kind of a substitute immune system. If your own immune system, for example, and the people that it works in best is the ones who don't mount an immune response. So if their own immune system is asleep at the switch, or those that have a very high viral load, so they have a lot of viral activity and their immune system is overwhelmed. But the president's doctor said this morning that he does have detectable level of antibodies in his blood. Now, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to tell whether these antibodies that the president's blood is showing are those that were given to him because they're human antibodies, or whether they're antibodies that his own immune system made.
Well, let's talk about the implications, though. Say this treatment proves to be effective in other tests and it does get emergency use authorization from the FDA. Is it something that many people could get in short order, or is it something that would still be down the line a ways?
You know, this is very tricky, Tom, because this treatment is very early in its clinical research, clinical investigation phase. So early on, when we're doing the trials, we want to look for the correct dose, whether it works, and whether it's safe. And then we really do them in a lot of people to make sure that no small safety signals emerge. If you shortcut the process at the early stage, in other words, if you take a phase 1, phase 2 therapy and take it all the way to emergency use authorization, you actually lose your ability to collect additional information on this treatment. Because imagine if you went into the hospital and there was a treatment available under emergency use authorization, everybody would want that treatment. Nobody would sign up for the clinical trials, and we wouldn't actually be able to answer the question of whether it works and, more importantly, whether it's safe. And I have to say that the bar for an EUA, for an injectable treatment, this is an IV treatment, should be much higher, because there's, of course, risks for intravenous medications of infusion reactions and other side effects. It's much more costly to administer this treatment. So it's not something that we ought to be doing willy-nilly when we don't know the dose. We don't really know if it works. We think it might. It's promising, but it needs additional investigation.
And the concept that you talked about when I first asked you about it, it sounds like that might, this sort of work with immune systems, work on other things, not just COVID-19. It might be a much broader application if, in fact, it does pan out.
That's actually a very good point. And I mean, this idea of giving people neutralizing antibodies is, the reason why convalescent plasma works, because that's essentially what you're doing. You're giving them somebody else's antibodies. But there's a few important caveats. First is that it has to be given early in the course of the illness, because remember, it's your substitute immune system. So if the virus has already taken over the body, it's almost a little too late to give that immune response later on. So we have to do it early, ideally when they're not in the hospital yet, and keeping them out of the hospital soon after exposure. And then the second I alluded to, which is the cost. This is a really costly therapy. Antibodies are expensive to make. They're obviously expensive to administer because they have to be done through an intravenous infusion. People can have infusion reactions, so you have to monitor them when you administer them. It's not quite as easy as giving somebody a pill.
Well, everyone's talking about last night's debate and now the next presidential debate apparently off, or at least President Trump says he will not participate if it is done virtually. But the Commission on Presidential Debates does want to make that second one on the 15th a virtual debate. So let's talk about it. Given the circumstances, the president's health, talk about the concept of needing to do this virtually as a doctor.
So, Tom, I am completely endorsing the concept of a virtual debate for 2 very important reasons. The first consideration is the president's health. So we've heard that he's on dexamethasone, which is a steroid that can suppress the president's immune system and make him more likely to be susceptible to bacterial infections, to viral infections, to a whole host of complications. So it's really not a good idea for a president to be in a crowded venue, or even a venue with limited number of people in an indoor space without masks. And then the second, of course, is the risk to others others that are attending. We don't know how long the president is going to be infectious. Normally, it's about 10 days from the onset of symptoms, but the president has received a number of disease-modifying therapies like steroids, the antibodies we talked about, as well as remdesivir, that can change the duration of infectivity and really make it unpredictable how long he's going to continue to be infectious. So the 100% foolproof way of preventing the spread of this virus any further in the hot zone that's already the White House is to hold this virtually.
You know, there's a lot that happens every day, and there's going to happen. There will be a lot happening between now and that date of the second debate. Dr. Payal Kohli, thanks as always. Good to talk to you.